Hello, welcome back to the channel, fellow fan. In this interview with Frank Perry, I'll be talking about the British avant-garde jazz scene from the late 60s through to the 1970s and what his involvement was in that time. Okay, so first question, when did you start playing avant-garde jazz music?
It was about February 1968.
1968, well, I suppose that...
It's when I left the Black Cat Band, so in a very short time I met this guy who played saxophone, and then he took me to listen to this band that was a very, very cutting edge sort of thing, and that introduced me to that whole music. I'd never heard anything like it before in my life. It was quite a shocking, quite a challenge, and I managed to get my head around it by the end of the evening. So then I realised that was my kind of path, if you like. So then that was it. I started playing that music.
So do you think, for the British scene, do you think that around 68 was the kind of starting point of it, or do you think it was already going on?
No, it was already started about 66, kind of started. So there's what's called the first wave, which was that lot, and then there's another wave that's just more the 70s, and I'm in between waves.
Okay.
I kind of coming along while the first thing had just started, but it had already started to move towards something different, and I came in on that. And then other people, more people got into it as the years went by.
What musicians did you play with, and then also we'll go into what venues did you play in?
Right. Well, there's this friend, Mike Sullivan, that introduced me to that music, and I played with him regularly. We used to rehearse about once a week until I moved out of London. And then I played with Evan Parker and Derek Bailey. These are, in my view, they're both geniuses and they're both innovators. They were responsible for developing a whole new way of playing and everything. So
Derek Bailey plays guitar.
And
Evan
Parker plays saxophone, tenor sax and soprano sax.
Also, the first guy you mentioned, Sullivan.
Oh, he played saxophone, and alto sax.
Okay.
So we had like a trio, bass player, and he and I used to play once a week, more or less, until I moved out of London. Then I went up Cambridge for about 18 months, and then I came back to London because there was only a handful of people playing the kind of music I was wanting to be playing, and they all lived in London, so that was that. So those people would play in little groups. There might be little people they regularly played with. You had to create your own scene. It you would have to find somewhere to play the music. So there was this place called the Little Theatre Club, and it was a penthouse. It was right at the top of this block, and you had to go up these steep stairs, no lift, so you had to lug all the stuff up there, and they put on theatre shows, the Little Theatre Club. But the woman who ran that would allow us to make music in there Thursday, Friday, Saturday night. So we could do that. So sometimes I'd go to see a gig, some of my friends playing that, and there'd be all this sort of stage stuff around, backdrops and things from the latest play that happened to be on.
Right.
So I used to go every week. Derek Bailey would play on a Thursday night, and he'd sometimes play with a guy called Jamie Muir who played drums, who went on to join King Crimson, and then he played with a woman called Christine Jeffries, and she and Jamie Muir actually both become part of a Tibetan community at some Sammy Ling up in Scotland. So they were seriously into that at the time, and Derek was just kind of playing with a number of different people in the cutting edge avant-garde with his guitar and doing his own solo stuff. And then there would be John Stevens, who had his group called the Spontaneous Music Ensemble, and they used to play Friday and Saturday night at the Little Theatre Club. Evan Parker was in that, and another saxophone player or reeds player called Trevor Watts, and they did have a bass player called, what was his name, Dave. He went on to play with Miles Davis anyway, basically. So we didn't see a lot of him once he'd gone to America and all that. Dave Holland. But he used to play with that band, the Spontaneous Musical Ensemble, and I used to go and watch them. There was a regular audience that were all pretty friendly with the band, and every once in a while it would get quite popular and there'd be a big audience there, but mostly there were these hardcore lot. And after they'd done their gig, we'd go to Ronnie Scott's club, that'd be open for another few hours, and we'd all get in with John Stevens, all get in for free, and as long as we spent a bit of money on drinks and that, they didn't mind. So we'd get, and then when they finished at Ronnie's about 3 o'clock in the morning, if they were still wanting to make music and that, we all go round to Rain Man's club and then play till 6, 7, 8 in the morning or whatever, and just keep going all night. So I was the house drummer at Ray's place, so I used to get to play with some of these people who'd come on from Ronnie Scott's.
Right.
You know.
Yeah.
But we used to go around with John to the 100 Club or Ronnie's or whatever, and he was very opinionated about the music he was doing. That was it. That was the only real music on the planet. And so we'd turn up at other places, 100 Club, and he'd be like, "Oh God, listen to this, like same old crap," you know. And quite funny. He'd be getting in for free, you know, and then he's slagging everybody off when he gets in there, because it's very different to what he does. You know, he's dead now a long time. He died in a car crash or something like that. But he was an original player. So a lot of these people had very original ways of playing. And there was like a European avant-garde jazz scene, and some of those people, a few of those could play with Evan and Derek and that, but mostly they were slightly more jazzy. They were more free jazz rather than this totally improvised music.
And the time when you were playing with Keith Tippett, that's not in the avant-garde.
That's the same time.
Okay.
He was considered, was considered sort of avant-garde, but he'd be one of the bands that this guy would be slagging off. He'd be going around. It sounds just like
too normal.
Yeah, you know, it just sounds like McCoy Tyner or whatever. You know, so I've heard it all before. You know, it's nothing original. Because he was like a jazz pianist. And then till he met me, and he started doing all this really weird stuff. And I think some of his fans and followers probably consider it was the worst thing in his ever life was to play with me. Cause before that, he's doing this jazz, he's making money, he's doing all the clubs, you know, making albums. It's all very popular. When he starts playing with me, it's like, what's going on? What the hell is this? You know? But he really wanted to do it, you know, and really, you know. And then I stopped playing with everybody. About 1974, 73, 74. But he was with the band that we had a group together which we called Overy Lodge, and that was avant-garde and totally improvised music. But otherwise, he was still doing his other stuff, so you know he was still doing quite a lot of work and getting money for that.
Right. What was your favourite venue to play at within any of the avant-garde groups and performances?
I think it's a place called the Cockpit Theatre, which was a kind of arts place. So you'd have the Arts Council of Great Britain, and they would supply funding for some of this music. And so you'd have to, if you got on with the people on that panel, you'd get money to put on gigs, and there'd be certain places they would want you to put events on, you know. So this Cockpit Theatre was one of those. So I played there with a guy called Chris McGregor. He was a piano player from South Africa, and he used to play when he was in South Africa where they had all the apartheid stuff. He played with these Zulus. And he called them the Blue Notes, so they came over to Britain, and it was Chris McGregor and his Blue Notes, and they used to do lots of gigs playing their music with these kind of African guys, Dudu Pakwana, Mongezi Fazer, Johnny Diami, and they were his band. And then he'd do solo things, and he'd play with a few different people, but there would be these bunch of Zulus that he mostly played with. So there was a number of places we could play, but the Cockpit Theatre had a good sound in there, and it was not near any noisy roads or anything. So I liked the fact that
That was in London, was it?
Yeah. I can't quite remember. Maybe near Notting Hill, somewhere North London. I did a few gigs there. Then Ronnie Scott's, so obviously, we used to play downstairs at Ronnie's. There was what was called the Musicians Cooperative, and this was Evan Parker, Derek Bailey, and Tony Oxley. These were these kind of avant-garde jazz musicians who had arranged with Ronnie Scott, to use his club on a Sunday when it wasn't normally used that much. So we would put on a once a month an international thing with some musicians from Europe and that, and I did solo concerts there and played in different combinations. Keith Tippett, our group, we were managed. The manager was Ronnie Scott, so we did a whole season at Ronnie's. We were upstairs for 10 months playing, just doing every Wednesday night. We would be up there, and Keith would want a guest.
Okay.
Which was why he wanted to come up with a name for the group that was like a kind of an umbrella thing. So with Overy Lodge, it wasn't saying, oh, that's going to be Frank, Keith, Fred, Doodle, you know. And so it would be open to if we wanted to bring somebody else in. So then what he would do, he would invite a guest to play a set. Well, Overy Lodge would begin and end the evening, and then the guest would do some sort of spot, solo, duo, trio, whatever.
Okay.
You know, so yeah. So then we were there about 10 months.
Okay, and what out of all the different avant-garde groups you played in, which one was your favourite band group to play in?
Well, they were each different, really. I mean, there's fundamentally there's what we could call an atomistic way of playing, where it's extremely intense listening, and everybody's listening to absolutely every single sound everybody's making, and they're reacting to it. So it's extremely focused, concentrated. And then there's more like playing in a sort of a groove. So Keith Tippett was more like playing in a groove. He wasn't into so much extremely intense, hardcore listening. Whereas the other band I had, Balance, which was an electric guitarist called Ian Brighton, and Radu Malfatti on trombone, and then eventually joined by Phil Waxman on electric violin. That was far more atomistic and listening, very intense, clear, close listening. And so I didn't find it would be one or the other, you know. Like, so Keith would be in this groove, and then he wouldn't get into this really close stuff, and then the other people would tend to get into the close stuff and not really get into a groove. So it was awkward, you know. So I enjoyed playing with Evan and Derek, and I enjoyed playing with Mike Sullivan, but he had some sort of problem with his teeth, and I think the dentist, he had some sort of damage to his mouth, which meant he couldn't play for a while.
Okay.
And by that time I was very busy playing with Keith Tippett, Evan Parker, Derek Bailey, and Ian Brighton, and, you know, so if I wasn't rehearsing on a day, I'd be recording in a studio, and if I wasn't doing that, I'd be performing somewhere. So every day I was doing something with somebody and getting extremely busy, you know. But the thing there was that I didn't really get a chance to settle down. You know, if I was playing with one group, I could get really close, you know, but because it would be this lot one night and somebody else another night, and another situation the next night. I had a summer season in Cornwall, where I was depping for a guy called Trevor Taylor, who gave me the gig and played drums in this jazz trio, and I was down there for the summer season for several months, and so I was playing with them several nights a week. So we got really close, and I quite liked that, because I was, you know, I had a chance to get somewhere, because in all the other situations I'm playing with somebody that night and then won't play with them for weeks again, and so I'm all over the place, not really getting a chance to develop anything.
What was the name of that group?
It was called the Jazz Roots.
Oh, okay.
It was a guy called Garde Charles who played double bass. He was left-handed, so he played left-handed bass, and then it was vibraphone. So it was vibraphone, bass and drums.
Okay.
And we played, there was the Railway Tavern in Penzance, and it was a jazz folk cellar, so he would book the jazz people. We would do the jazz thing so many nights a week, his wife sang, so one night a week we'd be backing her singing jazz songs, and then there'd be folk some other nights, you know. But at least with this group, I was getting to play with them regularly, and so I enjoyed the chance of really getting to work with another musician and being able to get really close with them, really tight.
So what instruments were you playing during, like I say again, just during this time frame with the avant-garde?
Well, I did have a Chinese trombone I used to play. I had Chinese flutes, xiao, which are end-blown notch flutes. So I played them. I played shakuhachi. I also did voice work with Mongolian overtone singing, Tibetan chanting, and then regular voice kind of work. And then I'd play drums and some extended stuff there. I might have a kind of a Chinese xylophone, and I got a metallophone that was tuned to a particular scale that I played on some other things. But so I got my first gong in 1968, and then I gradually started to get more gongs. And then I got my first singing bowls in 1971, and gradually I get more of them, and I get more temple instruments. I would get a voice that said to me, go to Portobello Road Market, there's some bells for you. I went down there, found out where it was, went down there, and then there was this crockery store with all this junk, and then in the far corner was what looked like 3 bells, and they were 3 400-year-old Japanese Zen Buddhist temple bells. So I thought, these are obviously the bells I've been told to come and get. And also that same day I found a Chinese Ming Dynasty temple bell in the first shop I went in. So I was starting to get some of these very kind of rare temple instruments from Buddhist monasteries and places like that. And then gradually, I started to invent some of my own instruments and make them myself. So I'd have hundreds of instruments then that would, basically I got this I got this phone call one day from a yogi from Tippett saying he'd been asked to give me this cymbal. It happened to be quite close to a birthday of mine, and so he said, "Are you interested?" So I said, "Yeah, yeah, of course." So he turned up, he played this thing, and I'd never heard anything like it before or since. It was like I suddenly got this great big flash of light when he struck it, and it's an incredible instrument, but it's an instrument in terms of putting you in tune with the cosmos rather than playing in F sharp or something. So that did this one thing. It was extremely powerful. So then I've got all these instruments, all these gongs and all sorts of things, and then this thing, because when I play that, it's like bang. The other things, it's okay, nice sounds, but this thing does one thing and it does it really well. So then, of course, I would then have some of the instruments that were very unique and very special. And I would always try and build a bridge. I'd always try and get some other instruments that were the same family, or they could, if I wanted to spend some time in that area of sound, I'd have a bit of variety of things I could play to sustain interest. And so I was always kind of doing that. If I got something that stood out from everything else, I'd try and get some other things so I could build a bridge. I could either go straight to it or I could go to it slowly. I could build up towards that thing. I like to give myself as much freedom and choices.
So in the time period of this, the avant-garde time period, obviously previous to that you were playing just regular kit drums.
Yeah.
But when you got into this stage, this is when obviously all the expansion of the different instruments come in.
Well,
but were you still playing kit drums as well, or was there not really much drumming going on within?
No, when I left London, I started to play avant-garde jazz and this thing, and so then I moved up with my father. His business moved up into Mildenhall, Suffolk, and I used to work in the factory, so I got frames made by my dad. So the people who worked there would build me frames to house these gongs and bells and things I had. So I had a bass, it was built around a drum kit, but I had these other metal frames that had all these other things hanging off, and this is way before anybody else did anything like that. What was he? Carl Palmer. He came to a gig of mine at Ronnie Scott's when we were upstairs. Next thing I know, he's gone round trying to have these frames built for him, for his stuff, and trying to take it. Oh, he only gets a big bell. You've got to get a big bell. I've got bells. You've got to get the biggest bell you've ever seen. All that crap. And so he went off with that idea, and I'd invented some way of where I could put another cymbal on top of a cymbal, so I'd make something that I could fit it together, because I wanted to be playing some cymbals upside down. So I was wanting to play these Chinese cymbals that had a very large bell and then a little bit round there, and they sounded, I could play them upside down, so I could play on the inside these very staccato, very short sounding, high pitched pingy sort of thing, or I could strike them on the rim and get a drum of a cymbal sound that rang on. So I had a choices. So I wanted to play some cymbals on top of other cymbals, and so I invented those. And I think then some company came up with a nicer looking invention. So that's how it would generally work. I just want to do what I want to do, and I come up with some way of doing it, and somebody would think, oh, that's a good idea, or nick that, and I'll make a load of money out of it. And I'd just have it for myself. I wouldn't. So when I started making wands to play the bowls, that was just so I could play. I had something to play them with, and then people started to want to buy them off me, so I started making them for other people. But originally, I only made them because I hadn't got anything. I've got nothing else to play them with. Nobody had anything to play with me, so I had to invent something. So luckily, I'm quite good at inventing stuff. So yeah, so I had a number of different things, and then there was things I'd found on the road. There was an Austin hubcap that in those days were metal hubcaps, and they sounded, obviously they were round, I'd drill a hole in the middle and have it mounted like a cymbal. And then I found a gear wheel from a mini car that I then would hang that up on the kit, and that would make a certain sound when it was struck, and I could do things. And I even bought jelly moulds and cake tin biscuit type moulds where I could turn it into a raspador. And so I had various handmade or adapted instruments, and I even had glass instruments. I invented these. Because I was involved with Paiste, I went out there I'd been told that if you're a member, they'll give you one of these little discs, and I thought that could sound nice on the hi-hat. So I went there and I checked out these discs, and they sold them as sets. So I checked them and found the ones that I wanted and ordered them. And then they had a stack on a bench that had been there for years, covered in dust, and they said they wanted to go down into the next octave. These were the black notes in the next octave down, but by that point when you hit it, there was more than one sound, so you couldn't call it tuned anymore, so they just didn't know what to do with them, left them there. They ended up giving them all to me. I went away and cut them all up and did things. And then I was using plastic drain pipe tubes to amplify the sound. And then one day I was passing a shop that sold all these Kona coffee percolator funnels that were glass, and I suddenly thought, they might work, and then I wouldn't have to have a great big tube in front of all my instruments. I could just have this little glass thing. So I bought a range of them. There's different sizes that they did, and that was funny because it was a Saturday, and the guy said, I'll have an A, a B, C, D, and a large and the standard. And he said, what, you broke them all? I said, oh no, I haven't broken. I want them for playing music. He goes, oh my God, he had to go for a cup of coffee. He was like, oh my God, man, I must have buy coffee percolator funnels to make music. So I don't care. And they worked. So it was brilliant. I just had to have these little bits. Then I'd have these from the science laboratory type clamps that I would clamp these, make a frame and then clamp these glass percolator things onto there, and then they would amplify the sound of the discs. So I'd work out the right size to go with the different discs. But then I also had a set of them that were just glass bowls, so they're like glass bells, so I could just play them, and they had like a glass bell rather than a brass bell. So I would just always looking to increase the number of different sounds that I had. So I ended up with hundreds of instruments.
Okay, I was just wondering what memories you might have of the musicians, but outside of the performance side of it, musicians that you were playing with. Yeah. Well,
there was one quite funny one. Ian Brighton, who played, as I say, played guitar in my band called Balance. It was us two, but we would have these other musicians, and it would sometimes be them, but it was basically us. We started it and we ended it. And so I was doing a solo concert at the Wigmore Hall on the very day that my father died. And I was doing a solo and Derek Bailey was doing a solo. And we'd done this same thing abroad in the Palais de Beaux-Arts in Brussels. And then Bailey had gone on first and the whole audience were playing flutes and whistles and they weren't listening to him at all. And when I got on, they all shut up and listened. So this time he said, I'm going on second this time, and he's got to go on first. Oh, okay. And so I must have mentioned it to Ian that my dad had died that day, you know. So I said, oh bloody hell, you've got to do a solo concert. And your dad died this morning, you know. And I said, that's all right. He said, I've just been talking to him. Whoa, hold on a minute. What? I said, yeah, it's just over there, you know. I'm not bothered that he's bloody died. He's only bloody... He still talks about that to this day, you know. You say, bloody hell, Frank, you know. You see, he's mentioned it to Trevor Taylor, and they're all sort of like, what? You know, is he real? Oh, no, yeah, he's serious. He's definitely real about all this. So that was quite funny. And then we do, he talks, another thing he talks about is I was taking him down this back street. I don't know where the gig was. It was down somewhere in London. And I knew this back way that was quicker and hardly any road. Well, the only thing was there was a narrow bit. And he's driving down. Suddenly he's like, oh my God, and he's put the brakes on. And I said, oh, careful of my cymbals. He said, about your cymbals, mate. He's wrapped the side of my car off. You know, you've got about an inch on the side here. Come on, I know this back way, yeah. And then we were doing a recording. It was at Trevor Taylor's studio. He was from Southend. And it was his garage, and he had these egg boxes all over the walls, so that was supposed to help the sound, you see. Anyway, we spent all day getting this cellist, a guy called Colin Wood, he was playing on this album. And we spent all day getting him right. And then finally he says, oh, actually I don't like it. And he wanted to go off for a walk down the beach with an ice cream or some bloody thing. So we spent hours again getting it to the point where he was happy. And I think he might have moaned, but we just said, sorry, mate, that's it. You know, it's not a cello solo with you're just part of the group and you don't like it. And I think he did go off again somewhere. Or he had to go off and do a gig in London. So he ended up just a quartet where he wasn't on most of the tracks. But that was funny with this sort of like, oh, I don't know if I feel, oh, come on, mate, we spent hours getting this right for you. Everyone else is ready to go. And you're, and now we're ready to record. Do you want to go off? And you said you got to go back to London because you got a gig tonight. So that was quite funny. And then we did that album, and that was a very good album in its day. We got very good reviews. And they said how, whereas most people were called spade imitators, they were trying to play like black jazz musicians, we were just did our own thing. And it was kind of quite, because like Phil was electric violin, so that was like classical energy. And Radu played trombone, but he also played classical. So it was jazz classical rather than just coming from a jazz thing. So it went into other areas of sound, But yeah, and then Tippett, well, he just funniest thing with him was I'd be doing a gig somewhere. I'll be loading my stuff up. It took me about 3 hours to set up, see. So he'd sort of say, oh, do you want to hand me your stuff, Frank? And I'd go, yeah, sure, man. And he'd look around, and he chose the smallest box he could possibly see. And he nearly dislocated his shoulder. I had to laugh, because I thought, he don't know what's in that. I know, it's bloody heavy, that box. And he'd gone to pick it up, nearly ripped his shoulder out, thinking it's a nice little hat box, And then, that was it, mate. He picked that one box up, that was it. And then I've heard that he's been telling other musicians in Europe, oh yeah, I used to help Frank get his stuff in and out. I thought, yeah, right. You used to help Frank once, one box. And even then it nearly killed him, And one time he picked a gong up, that gong that you've got, that flat one. He went to pick that, that's like about £70. He did the same thing. He went to pick it and he sort of couldn't get it off the floor. He thought it was like a cymbal. You pick, most cymbals aren't that heavy, but that thing's a half-inch thick, solid brass. So that was very funny. And then we did a gig in Germany, and it was advertised because it was Ronnie Scott's for our agents. They advertised it as Julie Driscoll because Keith was married to Julie. Well, she was Julie Tippett's, but she'd been a very famous pop singer called Julie Driscoll, who was also a very beautiful woman. So she'd been on Vogue and all these kind of fashion model things, you know. So then they'd advertised it, Julie Driscoll and her backing group. So they're all expecting to hear these pop songs. Her most famous one was "This Wheel's on Fire," you know, and it's all and like, you couldn't put a tune to it, you know, let alone tap your foot to it. So there was a riot half time, you know, like everybody wanted their money back. It was hell. So Julie had to go out and explain this was her latest. She wasn't doing pop songs anymore. And then the other time with them, the bass player, he actually used to play in a band called Soft Machine. That he did that, I think, to earn his money. But he was playing with us prior to that. And we did a gig on Broad. And we were in Zeebrugge. I think it was Zeebrugge or Ostend, one of these blooming Belgian boring places where you've got to wait to catch a ferry home. And so he's drunk. And he's upset the bloke in charge. He's fucking banging off. So they came, right, you, back of the queue. So I went, oh, Christ. We got about an 8-hour wait because of him opening his fucking, if he'd shut it, we'd have been on the boat, you know. So then he felt really bad. So he got really drunk. And he can hardly stand up. And then we drove into Dover. And he's hanging out the window, and the bloke from Ronnie Scott's is going, oh, Christ, I'm going to be here hours. They're going to want to look at every single box. And he's hanging out the window, Dolly! And they just said, oh, all right, boys, come straight through, boy. Not before they got a van load like that, we'll be here all night, we'll be holding them up. You know? So that was very funny. The bloke from Ronnie's was, oh, God, we're going to be here hours. Because that's what had happened. I was doing a solo gig in Florence, and we had to drive through the Alps, and my mate from the local health shop drove me that time, and we got stopped on the border, somewhere up in the middle of the mountains on the border with Italy, you know. And they wanted me to get everything out of that van. I had to list everything, down to a spanner, a hammer, you know, a screw for this and that, because I had to put some of the stuff together when I got to the gig, and they had to see it all. You know, he says you've got a rug here to play on. Yeah, here it is. Look, here's my rug, you know. And you've got a 34-inch symphony gong here. There it is, you know. We were hours there. And another time we were there with Bovary Lodge, and they went off with Harry Miller, the bass player. They broke his bass bow. £1,000 his bow was worth. They broke the bloody thing. And then Julie, I'd given her some Chinese herbal tea, and they were convinced this was dope, so they'd taken that off to the laboratory to be tested. So we were there hours, and then the ironic part was Chris McGregor, who I mentioned a bit earlier, he'd given a bag to Harry Miller for Harry to bring back to England for him, and he'd got all his dope in there. So we've got no dope anyway. The first thing we got dope in is somebody else's bloody bag that we're bringing back for a favour. So, of course, once they found all the dope, that was it then. There was, hell to play. But and then the other funny thing that would happen is I was doing a solo concert in the Tate Gallery. And I'm turning up, my stuff is all in cardboard boxes and lumps of wood and metal. You know, and I'd be at the recording studio, and I think Queen were there, some band like that, and everything was in these black cases. It was all smart, you know. I turn up, it's all like cardboard boxes, lumps of glass and lumps of metal and wood, and so it looks like a right load of junk, you know. And I'm putting it all together, and this woman kind of comes in and turns her nose up at me. She thinks I'm the roadie, I think, putting it all up, you see. So she's treating me like something you scrape off the bottom of your shoe, you know. And hours later, when I've got it all set up, the guy in charge comes round and he introduces me. Oh, Sheila, this is Frank Perry. This is the genius we've got playing for us today. And she's all, oh, hello. You know. And I thought, yeah, I met you a couple of hours ago, darling, when you was like, you know. Thought I was, didn't know who I was. I was just some sort of tramp or another. But I thought it's so funny, totally different face. You know, oh, this is Mr. Frank Perry. Oh, hello. How lovely to meet you. Yeah, right. Yeah. Don't worry about it, darling. Just bugger off. Leave me. And then I was I did a gig there. We did it in the Young Friends of the Tate, and Alan Davey, famous Scottish artist, painter. He also did music. See, so I was there playing with him, and Evan was with him, and another guy, somebody Harvey. Anyway, I'm setting all my stuff up, and I'd have all these little rings of like elephant bells and that you buy from India Craft, a whole string of bells, little tiny jingly bells, you see. And I'm hanging one up, and the guy's down there looking at me saying, "Mr. Davey is talking." I said, "Yeah, I know. Yeah, he's on about Zen, any or something." I thought, "Well, he talk fucking rubbish. I'm not stopping this because he's talking. He's talking crap anyway, you know." Then I had to go to the toilet. I come out the toilet and they're all running around saying, "Oh, where are you? Mr. Davies just introduced you and you're not there." Well, he didn't notice he's an artist. That's visual, isn't it? And he didn't see that I wasn't there. I've gone to the toilet, you know. I didn't know I wasn't allowed. So I thought, what a funny place. And then we got paid £10 and he split it 4 ways. Cost me over £4 on a taxi there and back. And he paid Evan. I thought, this bloke's a multi-millionaire. He wants his £2.50. Evan, he's got a wife and kids and he's paying, he's got to pay for that lot, and he gets the same money. We're all getting £2.50 each. And then he wanted this bass player to come who couldn't make it, so he got this trombone player to come. And Evan Parker told me, he said, he played 8 notes, that bloke. He turned up late, he played these fucking notes, and then he went off to do more. He'd been teaching all day. He done this gig for about 10 minutes, then gone off to do more teaching. So he's getting paid the same as me and Evan, £2.50, and he's played 8 notes. I thought, that's it. I thought, it's either me he's mad or this bloke. At that point I decided the guy was mad. I used to go out to play with him. I used to be on £3.50 a week on the dole, £2.50 a week rent, and it was 38p return on the train to go out to wherever this guy lived, And I'd go out there, and we'd play. Had it all worked out. We played between 9 and 11, and then we'd have some toast, and then we'd play from 11:30 to 12:30. It was all worked out, and he did that with his paintings. He'd do so much work on this painting till between this time and that time. And I thought, he's mad. Isn't he mad or something? Anyway, so he'd be talking, and he'd be going, how you getting on getting a job then, Frank? Is he trying to tell me to sod off or something? I mean, if I had a job, I wouldn't be here playing with him, would I? It's just a subtle way of saying, "We'd please stop turning up," And I thought, is he asking me about a bloody job for? And then he'd be, oh God, I thought, oh no, this guy's mad. He's got to be. But the one funny thing was there's this thing called a prepared piano. There's a composer called John Cage. Actually, before him, it was his teacher called Henry Cowell. But anyway, the thing was they used to put things on the strings. They put bits of rubber in between, nuts and bolts between that string and this string, and it would end up sounding like lots of gongs and things. So I didn't know, but he'd set his piano up to play these prepared piano by John Cage. So I've turned up, and at this time, I brought some little Japanese drums and Chinese cymbals and some other stuff. Anyway, all perfectly fitted with what he'd done, although I didn't even know. He recorded it all, he recorded everything. And it came out as an album, and all his musician friends were convinced it had all been written down and it had all been worked out. And I didn't even know had the piano tuned a funny way. Yeah. And then he's like a multi-millionaire, like I say. He got 99 copies of this album made, because once you hit 100 you had to pay tax. So he didn't want to pay tax. And then he signed 10 album covers and sold them at £10 each. That paid for making the record. And I got 1 free copy of that record, and that is it. The rest of it, I don't know where the money went, but it was his back pocket, because it was all paid for by the people who bought the signed cover. Yeah. So I just decided I stopped playing after I decided that he's mental. I thought, that's it. I don't need to be paying money to go out and play with this goon, and all he says is, "You got a job yet?" Somebody gave him a drum kit. I thought, ain't marvellous, millionaire, he gets given a drum kit and cymbals and all this stuff, and some drummer friend of his set it all up, But I thought, at least I haven't got to lug all the stuff on the train anymore. But of course, it weren't my kit, weren't set up to my sounds or anything, but it was all right. But I met him in Cornwall when I was down doing that summer season. The bass player used to play avant-garde jazz with this guy called Alan Davey. So we had a rehearsal at somebody's. It was a guy who made toys, children's toys, wooden toys, and we had a blow in some room there. And then the guy, this Alan Davies, said, when you're back up in London, you give me a ring and I'd like to do some playing with you up there, you know. And like I say, he used to record it all. But he put this one out as an album. It was called Mini Drums or something or another. But one free album, that was it, mate. Not a penny out. I don't know where all that money went. And he's a multi-millionaire, that's why he's a multi-millionaire. Yeah.
I was wondering what famous drummers you met, like through just maybe that scene or just.
There's another little funny story about that. Like Ian Brighton, I've mentioned a few times now. We were upstairs at Ronnie's. I was upstairs playing with Ronnie's with Overy Lodge with Keith Tippett and all that. Ian Brighton, 4 or 5 years ago, years after the event, because we're talking about 1973, years later he says, "Oh, did I ever tell you, when you were playing up at Ronnie's there, Elvin Jones was stood in the doorway watching you for about 10 minutes. I thought, you what? Elvin's he didn't even tell me. Like 20 or 30 years later, it's, oh, did you know, Elvin was watching you, you played the other week. I did get to talk, I went downstairs and chatted with him at the bar, about Coltrane and all that, But so lovely meeting him, he was great, lovely guy. No ego crap.
So was he playing at Ronnie's as well?
Yeah, he was playing at Ronnie's. I think it was Elvin Jones' group, because Coltrane was dead at that point. But he was obviously doing his own thing. So he had his band was playing downstairs, and that's probably when they were off. He was up watching what I was doing, So whether someone had said, "Hey, you want to catch the guy upstairs? He's doing some interesting stuff." I don't know. I didn't talk to him about it.
Yeah.
But otherwise, well, there was Joe Morello that I met. The guy, Tim Harris, the guy at school, he's dead now, but he played drums in a group called the Foundations. They had some #1 hits and that. And anyway, there was a bunch of drummers. There was Elvin Jones, I think Philly Joe Jones.
They're all American, were they? All?
Yeah, Sonny Murray, 4 drummers, and they were all playing solo. Right. And not all together, but I think they might have done something together, but mostly they were there to play on their own. And I wanted to see, and Joe Morello must have been the other one. So I wanted to see, I liked Sonny Murray because I loved Albert Ayler, so I was looking forward to seeing him. Of course, I loved Elvin. Oh, Max Roach was another one. I liked his playing as well. So I was going to have a good evening.
They're all American drummers.
Yeah. And we're all walking back, and we're walking back with Phil Seaman. So Joe Morello's with Phil Seaman walking along on the pavement there, and my mate Tim Harris has turned to Joe Morello and said, "What advice would you give any up-and-coming drummer?" So Phil Seaman's walking in the gutter for some reason. So Joe turns to him and says, "What would you say, Phil?" He said, "Give up." That was his words of wisdom. 2 words, give up. Bloody hell. So then, of course, you see at Ronnie Scott's, you'd have Phil Seaman, you'd have Elvin playing away, doing all his, sweating away, doing all his complicated drumming, and old Phil Seaman would be over by the bar going, they'd be going, "I like that 3 against 4 you're doing there," and that, he'd know it, he'd be able to understand everything that Elvin's doing. You'd have to be a drummer, and all that. And so they were having a good old time.
Who did that Phil Seaman play with then? 'Cause I've not heard of him.
He played all the Tubby Hayes, the local jazz, English London jazzers. So he might have even been the house drummer at Ronnie Scott's.
Okay.
He was a well-known drummer. He taught a lot of drummers, probably Keith Moon, Ginger Baker, a lot of those people. Right. He was into heroin and stuff, so that kind of did for him. But he was the top sort of jazz drummer. I never had any lessons with anyone, like I said. But I think Tim Harris probably had lessons from him. Right. And I think he had lessons from the drummer in the Shadows, I think was called Tony Meehan. I think who was probably getting lessons off Phil Seaman. So they showed me the ankle movement on playing the hi-hat. So I learnt a few things that these people have been taught by drummers, but I never had any actual lessons. But then John Heisman, he was a lovely guy, and I did one of my albums I recorded in John Heisman's studio, and I always remember that. It was we were doing a certain thing, and I was recording all these Tibetan, but as the instruments I invented and built myself. That was the first side of the album. Second side was my Tibetan instruments. So I was recording, obviously with them I take 2 hands to play it, so I'm doing overdubbing, multi-tracking. So I'm playing this bowl, and and it's faded into silence. And then I've brought in another one, and John Heisman said, "Wow, that's amazing! That timing was like that was so perfect. You know, I weren't expecting you to do anything else, but it was exactly the right. I'm going to make a note of that. And that timing was bloody amazing. You know." So I said, "Oh yeah, okay," because he'd had a studio specially made it float. It was a floating studio,
right,
and had a floating floor. You know, but he was a lovely guy, and his wife saw a bit of her, but she played saxophones and that. But he was he was a very nice guy, and I think he showed me some drumming techniques. He'd been working with some American marching drummers, and they had this kind of staccato thing where when you struck as soon as the drumstick struck the head, you brought it back up very sharp, so it would make a bang. It was a very staccato sort of thing. Whereas normally you wouldn't be doing that, but if you doing that, you would get this suddenly a sharper sound.
right.
You know, and then you say these guys great drummers, but they can't play on a kit. They've never played on a kit before. They don't really know what to do when they're sat behind 4 or 5 drums. They can sort of they can do their flams and all the rest on a snare drum, but stick them behind a kit with cymbals and it's like, ooh, you know.
Different style, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, how many hours a week do you think you practice in the avant-garde time? But then again, because you mentioned earlier how you're generally always either performing or recording or whatever, I'm wondering whether you didn't really need to practice that much because you were constantly, like say, obviously performing.
Well, I lived in a bed sit, and there was enough room to set my kit up between where the bed was and the bathroom wall was, so I could get to play my kit out to climb over the bed. But so it was set up all the time. So I would play whenever I wanted to play. I'd play.
Right.
So when I moved in, there's another little funny story. I had a little play. I set everything up and had a play. I went downstairs to pay the rent. So I said to the landlady, "Was that okay?" She said, "What was that? What was that?" And I said, "Well, I just had a little play up." She says, "Oh," she said, "I thought you were running the bath." So I thought, great, I'm in here. Because I want to play like I'm sounding like water anyway. So, you know, I used to work as a gardener and I used to listen to the rain on the roof because you weren't allowed to work in the rain. And I imagine I was playing cymbals with the rain. I'd be playing with the rhythms of the rain. And so I really wanted to kind of get that nature into my playing. So when she said I was running a bath, that was the best compliment I could have ever had. But so they were a madhouse. They downstairs, the guy played guitar well. He had fingers like bananas, and he was an Irish guy, builder, and he'd be drunk, you know. And he had this thing where he'd be singing Val Doonican songs, you know, to do what you do well, boy, jiggy 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 jing. And then the son would be playing Pink Floyd in his room or wherever he was playing, and then she'd have an electric typewriter. So then the dog would be barking, and the kid would be screaming his head off. And that's in the room right underneath where I'm living, you know, where I'm sleeping. So I used to play. I thought, "It's no worries me playing, mate, because enough noise going on here." And then the dog had done a crap outside the door of my bedroom. She said, I'm sorry," she said. She thinks of it as a gift. "Yeah, right. Well, would you take care of it for me, please? I haven't got anywhere to put it just at the moment." So that was her. So I used to practice a lot of that. When I was at home, I was allowed half an hour a day. That was it. And then at the weekends, I did between 8 and 13 hours a day. I could sit up in the works canteen, and I would play. I'd imagine I was playing with jazz musicians. I would do exercises and complicated things to build up my technique and stuff. And then I would just improvise. I would just play myself, just play drums, just to come up with something more spiritual. So I'd record a lot of it. And so I did that every week, and then I would be up there.
What recording studios did you use or record in?
All right, well, with Keith Tippett, we recorded, I think called Olympic Studios, which is down by Piccadilly. Very big studios. Well, they had a number of studio rooms, but they had a big room for like classical orchestras or jazz orchestras and that thing, and then smaller group things. But we used to use the big room. They were one of the big studios in London. So Robert Fripp was producing our records there. So there was there, and then there was Maida Vale Studios for the BBC for some of the radio things that we did for jazz in Britain with Keith Tippett and that, for when we joined the European Union. I think there was we were doing stuff being broadcast in the EU. And then Island Studios, which I think was at a place called Beethoven Street. It was something like that. It had an unusual name. I did
That's
go.
the Island Records label.
Yeah.
Studio then.
Yeah, I went there. I might have recorded with that David Sylvian, the lead singer from the pop group Japan. I did an album with him, and I think that was at their studios. I think he's on their label, and it was going to be music for an art installation. Some artist friend of his, and he had a deadline, and he was got very late, and he had a Japanese girlfriend, and she played him deep piece because he weren't too well, and so he heard that and liked that, and thought he'd like to use me to do the album with. So we did that, and that was in their studios. Let me think. Yeah, so a couple of BBC radio studios. As I say, Maida Vale was probably the main one. And definitely Command Studios, Olympic Studios, we did there a few times, recorded there, a couple of albums. But otherwise there was some down local, Ollie's place, which he called Music Al Fresco. So that was in his house really, but he had good gear and he knew how to use it, and so I did quite a lot of recording at Ollie's place. Either some bit with his wife, and then with Owen Davis doing his recordings of his poetry with Chaz and Kathy, and then my solo stuff that I did with at his studios as well.
And I was wondering whether any of the live performances were recorded professionally and then released on a label or such.
Yeah, there was Ogan label was owned by a few people, and one was the bass player in Overy Lodge, Harry Miller, and he was an African god Ogan to do with business and that, so they called the label Ogan. And we did a recording that was live at some Stockwell, maybe a library in Stockwell, and I thought the microphones were for the PA, but actually it was being recorded. And we had an interval, and then when Keith came back out, and he said, the guy's asking us if we can do an up-tempo number. And that's when I thought, but what do you mean? Was he telling us what to play? And then then it must have come out. I must have got involved with the mixing down with it all, and then it obvious was going to be coming out as a record, which it came out as Overy Lodge on the Ogan label, which recently got re-released as a CD a few years back. I think it did very well in Japan. So yeah, that was a live one that came out. Trying to think. I mean, because the trouble is that I've sometimes recorded some live things, but never with the intention of releasing it. A bit like the Black Cat Bones stuff. There was never the intention that would be coming out as any sort of release. How about that? I don't know, because with Overy Lodge we did a few studio recordings or radio broadcasts.
Yeah, I suppose the radio broadcast would have been live.
Yeah, it wouldn't be an audience, but it would be kind of live, just sort of. Yeah.
Okay. And I was wondering whether in the Avant-Garde period you played with any American jazz musicians?
No, I don't think so. It was more when I got into my own stuff and the spiritual meditative music, I got to play with some of the new age musicians. But in the jazz thing, I don't think so. No, not American, was South African. Chris McGregor and he had a group of Zulus that he played with, he called them the Blue Notes. So I played with them, various combinations of them. but I don't think so many Americans. You didn't get so many Americans over here playing.
Okay.
They'd go to Europe. There were some good scenes in Europe, you know, places where they can do gigs and that, but there wasn't so much, I don't think, in this country.
Okay. I was wondering where you travelled to perform.
Wherever I'm asked, basically. So,
No,
you know,
I mean, like say, when you were doing Avant-Garde, so was it just UK or did you go?
no, well, with Overy Lodge, we did a tour of Germany, France, Holland, Belgium. I think we certainly did them. I'm not sure if we did any others. I've done solo things in Copenhagen and France and Italy and other places like that. Then, of course, all throughout this country, England, Scotland, Ireland and Wales. No, I didn't. No, I didn't do any gigs in America. I did give lectures at the university over there, but I didn't take enough instruments to do any actual performances. But we used to tour quite a lot with Overy Lodge, and then mostly Overy Lodge we'd get all these playing in Europe, these different countries. We'd be away maybe a couple of weeks, and Keith was managed by the Ronnie Scott thing, so they would set up a tour, and you know they acted like as agents, and so we'd get to do a fair bit of that. And that was quite funny because I never have injections, so I don't know how they got round. They must have fiddled the whatever, I don't, you know, because there was whole in them days as well, you know. So I just I'm not having any injections. So whether they just put on the form he's had it, or I don't know what they did, but I managed to do it without having to have any.
And during what years were you doing avant-garde jazz?
Right. Well, I would have started in 1968. 1968, and then I stopped playing with everybody in 1974. I decided to stop in 73, but I honoured all the gigs that I'd got, until that I'd taken on. But in 73, I did all those, and that ended up being sometime in 1974 that I stopped playing with everyone to focus totally on my own spiritual music. So what's that? It's about 6 years, 5 or 6 years.
And the last question. What lessons did you learn during the time of doing avant-garde jazz?
Avant-garde jazz? Well, I've never really made music to learn any lessons. I just want to make music,
it's a time in your life. So when you look back on times in your life, you can often think, oh, I learned that. It might be a certain job, or it might be a certain circle of friends you had, or whatever. So I don't obviously mean anything to do with perhaps musical ability or anything else like that, but just probably life lessons, things that you've noticed during that time and thought, okay, yeah, that's what's going on there. We're trying to avoid that or this or that,
No, I don't know really. I mean, I'm generally quite easygoing. I'm not a dictator. I'll try and play in the group. I'll try and be performing the role of a drummer or a percussionist, and getting away with whatever I can and trying to make it. Well, I'm an original person, so I've always just looked within. I never learnt from anybody. I never decided that's the way to play with these people, da-di-da. I just was looking, I just let it unfold to do like with nature. I like nature, and I just allow things to happen. And so, and then I would be playing with different people and have to play in a different way with each one. And maybe even each time I played with them, it'd be a different way. I did not even like, there was an album came out a few years back that was he was an American guy as it happens, and he played tenor saxophone, but he lived in this country at that time. So I did play with an American, but most people had never heard of him. His name was Gary Window, and he was my roadie, but at one point he asked me to join him and do a duet at his children's school. But other than, but one time he invited me around his house. He was had this big flat, like a penthouse flat, that somebody let him live in for nothing, him and his family and all that. And every room was white, the floors were white, the ceiling, everything was white. And anyway, so I turned up and he had some microphones and I thought he was just recording it, and it was all on reel to reel, so we just jammed. Then years later, 20, 30 years later, they want to put it out as an album. You know, so that was the first and only time, no rehearsal. I just, what's recorded is exactly what happened the first time we ever sat to play it together, and his wife played piano on those things, so it was like a trio. And there was actually a drum solo on that thing that did come out on the album. I think I got to do like a little solo, and but that wasn't planned. I don't know how that happened, but and his way of playing was not the kind of way that wasn't the kind of style that I was used to working in, where I wanted to work in. It was more American, more loud and kind of stuff. So I played in a different way with that, which is quite good if people are listening to my playing. They might think, oh, this is very different to Overy Lodge, and then, oh, it's very different to what he's doing with this group. And because, like I say, I would try and fit in with the band, with what I felt went with the musicians and things and the style. And so I had a range of cymbals. That's the main thing, because the drum kit, that would stay the same, and I tuned them, learnt how to tune them myself, and that would be it. So it would just be down to the kind of cymbals that would affect the kind of sound of the kit that was in the group. You know, so I was rehearsing in a band in Cambridge, a band called Henry Cow, which went on to be a pretty big group, maybe in the experimental rock field. But at that time they were all at university, and they couldn't understand why I was playing with them, because I was playing with these top jazz musicians in the country. So why are you bothering with us? And it was very unusual. We sit down to rehearse in Cambridge University, and they go, right, we want 4 bars of 7/8, and then there's going to be 16 bars of 4/4, and then there's going to be so many bars of 5/8, and then we're playing a bit free for a bit, and then it's going to be that. And I could do it all. I could remember, right, okay, it's 4 bars of 5, and they were kind of, amazed. They were really happy to have me playing with them. But so I would develop a way to play with that group, and then they said, right, we're going to do a summer season, playing on boats or camps, I can't remember, but it was going to, with the idea of then moving on into becoming a proper group. And I realised that was a long way. It was a lot of commitment, and if I was buying particular cymbals to get a sound that I wanted for that group, it was a big chunk out of my musical life when I was playing with all these other people and wanting to do that. This wasn't really something I wanted to do. It was like I was up in near Cambridge, so I was happy to play with these people and rehearse and everything, but it wasn't that much of my direction. It was a little bit out. So I decided, I said, no, I'm not going to, I'll drop out now, and you can get yourself somebody else, because I explained why. I didn't have the money to be buying loads of cymbals to have a particular sound. So I don't know really, so I guess I was pretty flexible, pretty easy. And there's most of the bands I ever played in, there was hardly any talk, no discussions about the music or anything, so I didn't learn anything that way. I guess, and if it was only like with Overy Lodge, we'd be on the road together, so I might learn certain things there. So like, for instance, we're on tour, and then I had a lot of stuff, hundreds of instruments, so it used to take me about 3 hours to set up, and 3 hours to put it all away again, and they all being taken off and wined and dined by the promoters and that. And then I'd turn up at the restaurant, and then Keith, at one time I remember him saying, there's a few nice grapes there, Frank. Great, I've been working my balls off all day, I've been hours setting all this stuff up, then hours doing the rehearsal, hours playing, hours packing it all away, loading the lorry up, and there's a few grapes I could have, So, and then the situation where we'd be in a restaurant, and they're having all this booze and all this massive amount of stuff. And I know I've had a salad that cost 10 francs. And at the end they've said, we can't work it out, we'll have to just take it as group expenses. So, no, hang on, no, sorry, Frank. So I thought, right, next time I'll take my own food. I'm not being ripped off like this anymore. Although they probably did, because I felt they didn't need to ask, to just take it all as group expenses, which is ripping me off, because didn't even set a foot in the restaurant. So I kind of learned, okay, right, I'm going to eat myself in future. And they do the same thing. There's nothing much I could do, you know. Like we would be my wife. Then she wasn't my wife then, but we went somewhere, and we were booking into the hotel rooms, and Keith and his wife took the best room, and we got given some other room that was like up in the loft, freezing cold, a huge duvet. So they'd get there down there first and get the best of everything, and have the best meal, the best rooms. And so, but there's not much to learn from that. Just the normal people being selfish, you know.
Yeah.
And we can do is get there earlier. I mean, it was a similar thing at Ronnie Scott's. There was a guy, Tony Oxley, an English drummer, who was in the same area as me, of that kind of music. And he got there at 8 o'clock in the morning or something, so he could set up exactly, you know, on the stage. And there was no room for me then, so I had to set up on the landing outside Ronnie Scott's office. So, which I did. I didn't make a fuss about it or anything. I just got on with it, set up the stuff, and played with Keith. I'd try and hear what he was doing from on the main stage. And Ginger Baker turned up at that thing and walked past my stuff and said, "What's this, a junk shop or something?" Because you know, there's all this weird stuff that's not part of a normal drum kit. So that was fun. I just didn't take any notice of him. But so there's kind of weird things like that used to go on, you know. But Derek Bailey we had a gig where he did a solo and I did a solo, and in Belgium, in Brussels, he went on first, and so I'm listening, and the whole audience is making noise the entire time he's playing, all playing flutes and whistles, and while he's trying to do his solo, and then I got up there, so I thought, right, I've got some Chinese flutes with me, I'll start off playing with them. And then I gradually all nod, hey, you know, and they all shut up. And then I went and did my thing. So then what this guy then did was the next time we did one in London, he said, I'm going on. What was it? He said, I'm going on second, and you can go on first this time. He obviously didn't realise it was nothing to do with who went on first, or it was just somehow he hadn't quite got it with the audience, you know. So there's funny little things like that, you know. And then because of my beliefs and everything, some other musicians would get freaked out about that, or they argue with me or try and argue with me. But I'm not. I don't care. So I'm not out to get any converts or anything. So I just either agree with them or I'd argue. And if they were too fixed in their minds, I'd just not bother. It's not a big deal in my life.
Okay. Well, I think that concludes that. Already.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, and hopefully you enjoyed watching.
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.